Now Islam came into contact with India. Although Islam came to India after it had played its progressive role and its leadership had been wrested from the learned and cultured Arabs, the revolutionary principles of the days of its origin and ascendancy were still inscribed on its flag, and a critical study of history might reveal that the Muslim conquest of India was facilitated by similar native factors as in the case of Persia and Christian countries. No great people with a long history and old civilization can ever succumb easily to a foreign invasion unless the invaders command the sympathy and acquiescence, if not active support of the masses of the conquered people. Brahminical orthodoxy, having overwhelmed the Buddhist revolution India of the 11th and the 12th centuries, must have infested with multitudes of persecuted heretics who would eagerly welcome the message of Islam. As far as the historic source on the Arab conquest of Sindh are concerned, there is a miserable dearth. Even the Arab sources only give brief, scanty details or passing reference to this episode while discussing the rise and expansion of early Islam in India. The conquest of compressed into a few pages of Futuh al-Buldan of al-Baladuri, al-Madani gives plentiful information on the Arab conquest of Transoxiana, but Sindh finds little mention in his account. However, this dearth of the Arab sources on the theme is largely compensated for by the Chachnama, a Persian text written by Ali Kufi in 1226 CE. It is a reliable historical work that claims to be the translation of a lost Arab account dealing with the history of this conquest. It is only to the Chachnama that one can give the credit of providing detailed information of the Arab invasion of Sindh, which was the extreme western part of India at that time. The region of Sindh is located in the southeastern zone of present-day Pakistan. This area on the western coast of Indian subcontinent had a long history. Since ancient times, it has been a hotbed of trade and commerce. The Arab merchants had active trade relations with their Indian and South Asian counterparts. They were known to the sea routes to the western coast of India. To be precise, these merchants sailed from Siraf and Hormuz on the Persian Gulf to the mouth of the Indus, and thence to Sapera and Cambay, and further to Calicut and other ports of the Malabar coast. They brought back tidings of Indian wealth and luxury goods like gold, diamond, jeweled idols, etc. to Arabia. Therefore, as India had been famous for its riches for long, the Arabs wanted to conquer it. After the Islamization, they had the proselytizing zeal that made them overrun many regions in Middle East, Europe, Africa, and Asia. The penetration of the Arabs in the coastal towns of Sindh and Indian subcontinent had started as early as 636 CE during the reign of Caliph Umar, the second successor of the Prophet. The pillaging expeditions, such as one in Thane near Bombay in 637 CE, continued for a longer time. However, such expeditions were only plundering raids and not conquest. A systematic Arab conquest happened in India only in 712 CE during the reign of Umayyad Caliph al-Walid. It was then that Sindh was incorporated to Muslim Empire. As mentioned before, along with the aspiration of own Indian riches, the reason of the conquest of Sindh was the desire of the Arabs to spread Islam. But the immediate cause was the Sindhi pirates who had plundered some Arab ships near the coast of Debel or Dabol or Karachi, present-day Karachi. Historical evidences show that these ships carried gifts sent by the king of Ceylon for the Caliph of Baghdad and also Al-Hajjaj, the governor of Iraq. This was sent to establish cordial relations with Al-Hajjaj. However, the ship was plundered by the pirates near the mouth of River Indus, and the Arabs were detained at the port of Debol. A demand for restitution was made to King Dahar to compensate for the outrage and punish the offenders, but he refused to do so. He showed his inability to control the pirates as a reason behind his refusal. Nevertheless, he was not trusted and was rather accused by Baghdad of protecting the pirates. So Hajjaj took the permission of Caliph Walid for attacking Sindh. Therefore, 3 military expeditions, one after the other, were led against the king. It was in the third expedition by Muhammad bin Qasim in Debel that Dahar was defeated and killed. Subsequently, all the neighboring towns of Nerun, Rebar, Brahmanabad, Alor, and Multan were also captured. This is how the state of Sindh was finally conquered by the Arabs in 712 CE. Muhammad bin Qasim conquered Sindh, which is now in Pakistan, with the active assistance of Jats and other agricultural communities oppressed earlier by the Brahmin rulers. Having conquered the country, he followed the policy of the early Arab conquerors. He employed the Brahmins in pacifying the country by taking them into confidence. He allowed them to repair their temples and to follow their own religion as before, placed the collection of revenue in their hands, and employed them in continuing the traditional system of local administration. But even the Brahmins, some of them at any rate, were prepared to go over the side of Mleccha, a term which was used in India for polluted ones, especially for the Muslims conquerors. The social condition of the country could not be very normal. Evidently, the society was in such disintegrated and chaotic state as to make the position even of the most privileged class insecure. This is usually the result of counter-revolution. A revolution may be defeated by a combination of forces, but that does not enable the triumphant forces of the reaction to remove the cause of social disintegration which brought about the revolution. In India, the Buddhist revolution was not defeated. It was miscarried owing to its internal weaknesses. Social forces were not sufficiently mature to carry the revolution to victory. Consequently, after the downfall of Buddhism, the country found itself in a worse state of economic ruin, political oppression, intellectual anarchy, and spiritual chaos. Practically, the entire society was involved in the tragic process of decay and decomposition. That is why not only the oppressed masses readily rallied around the banner of Islam, which offered them social equality, if not political liberty, even the upper classes offered their services to the foreign aggressor out of selfish motives. That shows that while the masses were in a state of despair, the upper classes were thoroughly demoralized. Arab rule was confined to Sindh region alone, and the Indian rulers ruled their states without fearing any Arab invasion. However, the situation changed in 11th and 12th centuries with the rise of Turks in Central Asia. After having gained a foothold in northwestern frontiers, Islam could enter India due to the Muslim Turks, namely Mahmud Ghaznavi and Muizzuddin Muhammad Ghori. They attempted to either plunder or conquer India between 10th and the 12th centuries. The situation started changing from the end of 9th century. It was mostly because of the dissipation of its energy and resources in fighting the heathen Turks from Central Asia. The empire got fragmented into several aggressive fledgling states ruled by both non-Turk rulers and the Turkish kings or sultans. All these states accepted the suzerainty of Caliph or Khalifa, who received his formal legitimacy through the grant of Manshur, the formal letters. Now, most of these Muslim rulers called themselves sultans, and on the other hand, in the 8th century, the Turkish nomads had been infiltrating into Transoxiana region, the present Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan area, the region between Central and East Asia, and it was known as Mawarun Nahar in Arabic sources and Fararud in Persian. As they had got good military skills and they were converted to Islam and recruited as mercenaries, palace guards, and slaves by the Abbasid caliphs and the Iranian rulers, gradually these Islamicized Turkish commanders also got Persianized in language, etiquettes, administrative policies, etc. Now it means that this Turkish governing class had assimilated Persian culture and were proud of its racial origin. They were bilingual in speech. Ultimately, they became the ones to expand their power in both West Asia and Indian subcontinent. With the rise of Turks in Central Asia, Islam could enter India due to the Muslim Turks, namely Mahmud Ghazni and Muizzuddin Muhammad Ghori, who conquered India between the 10th to 12th century. Now, after the fall of Abbasid Empire in this region, the situation was of political fragmentation. It was ruled by many rulers, each fighting amongst each other for expansion of one's own territory and power. Also, in such states, even ambitious officials tried dethroning the king to usurp power for themselves. This is how many dynasties rose and fell. Amid such political flux in Western and Central Asia, the main factors behind the strength and survival of any dynasty was its military power and efficiency. Therefore, we see many dynasties coming to power one after another. This is how the Samanid dynasty ruled from 874 to 999 CE. It was established by an Iranian noble from Balkh who was a convert. He had governed regions like Samarkand, Herat, etc. in Central Asia and Afghanistan. This dynasty was followed by the Ghaznavids who ruled from 962 to 1186 CE. It was founded by Alptagin, a Turkish slave under the Samanids. The Turkish emperors made continuous inroads into the Turkoman areas for capturing slaves who were in great demand in slave markets of Herat, in present-day Afghanistan, Sistan, in present-day Iran, Samarkand, and Bukhara in modern-day Uzbekistan. Ghor had a reputation for supplying slaves to these markets. The warriors who were involved in such raids were free to earn through plunders in such expeditions. However, another aim of the Muslim Turkish warriors behind such loot and plunder was to spread Islam amongst the non-Muslim population, and so they were known as the Ghazis. And hence we see the Ghazi spirit was first employed and exhibited in fighting the Central Asian nomadic tribes, and later it was deployed against the non-believers in India. Mahmud Ghazni, a plunderer from Afghanistan, embodied and displayed the same spirit in his raids in India. He looted many temples in India, including the famous Somnath temple of Gujarat, defeated its rulers, and took back the wealth to Afghanistan. The wealth looted and earned from plunders in India helped him against his enemies in Central Asia. He even extended his empire in Iran and additionally got more recognition from Khalifa at Baghdad. Further, the Ghaznavids were defeated by the Seljukids and also the Khwarezmi dynasties. In fact, the latter was also established a vast empire and was shattered later on by the ruthless Mongol attacks of Genghis Khan or Genghis Khan. The Ghurid Empire, which came into being, it was actually a small and isolated province of Ghor, located between Ghaznavid Empire and that of the Seljukids, which was an unusual development in the 12th century. It was one of the least developed regions of the present-day territory of Afghanistan. It lay west of Ghazni and east of Herat province in fertile valley of the Herat or Hari River in the western Afghanistan. Since it was a hilly tract of land, the main occupation was mostly cattle rearing or agriculture. It had remained a pagan region surrounded by the Muslim principalities. However, it was Islamicized by Ghaznavids in the late 10th and the early 11th century. The Ghurid ruler or the Shanshabanids were humble pastoral chieftains. They tried to make themselves supreme in the middle of the 12th century by intervening Herat, and when its governor had rebelled against the Seljukian king named Sanjar. Shahabuddin Ghori or Muizzuddin Muhammad bin Sam fought two battles with the North Indian ruler Prithviraj Chauhan, who ruled Delhi at this time, and he had his capital at Kilai Rai Pithora in Delhi. They fought the battles in 1191 and 1192 CE at Tarain. Ghori won the second battle. Satish Chandra opines that the second battle of Tarai was more a war of movement rather than a position. Now, when you see the map, you can see the Ghurid Empire, the principalities that the Ghurid has carved out. You can see that the entire northwest is covered by him, then the western portion, and it has also occupied the Indo-Gangetic Plain area. Now, the mounted archers, or what was the reason of the success of the Ghurids? How could they defeat the Chauhan or the Rajput rulers so easily? Now, the Prithviraj Chauhan army was attacked by his fast-moving archers, and he was caught by the Turkish forces near Saraswati and Sirsa in the present-day Hisar district of Haryana. The defeat of the Chauhans and the Gahadwalas of Kannauj in the Second Battle of Tarai and the Battle of Chandawa respectively were biggest victories for the Turks. Since these were the most powerful foes for them, the Turks laid the foundation of Turkish rule in Gangetic Valley with these victories. Even after the two wars, there was a resistance to the Turkish invasions in Ganga Valley, but these minor revolts were easily suppressed. With the foundation of Delhi Sultanate, an Islamic rule was laid in India. One can see the map of the Delhi Sultanate for the 5 dynasties ruled from 1192 to 1526. They have reached to the deepest south area from the northwest, from the extreme western region to the eastern region, extreme eastern region to the southmost area. So these were Mamluk or the slave dynasty, Khalji dynasty, Tughlaq dynasty, Sayyid dynasty, and the Lodi dynasty. Now, what happened when these sultans ruled India? What was the result on the society, politics, and economy? The first and foremost strongest effect was felt in the liquidation of feudalism and linking of far-flung parts of northern India under center, and thus the establishment of a strong centralized power by introducing Ekta system. The introduction of Indo-Islamic architecture was done by these sultans. The Turks introduced new style of architecture in India with arches and domes. Now these are the two tombs where you can see, one is the Iltutmish tomb and one is the tomb of Tughlaq, where you can see the dome and the true arch. Now these were definitely an art that the Arabs borrowed from the Christian world, while Indian elements were also incorporated as decorative ones as Kalash motif, lotus motif, bells and chains, Chaitya arches, Buddhist arches, serpentine struts. Depiction of living being was not allowed in Islam, so they chose geometrical designs. Here in this picture you can see the spear-headed fringes and the geometrical pattern, the medallions on the walls and also domes, and inverted lotus on the domes you can see, which is the blending of Indian elements in the Islamic architecture, right? Now these are the Chaitya arches. One can find out the difference clearly with the Chaitya arches and the Islamic arches. Chaitya's arches were borrowed from the Buddhist architecture, and Islamic arches were actually taken from the Christian architecture. Now the Islamic arches, these form the basis of the building, while the Chaitya arches remained for the decorative purposes, right? Now use of script on the facade of the buildings also helped them to spread the message of their religion in the newly conquered territories. You can see on the buildings the rising script from head to toe, or you can on the buildings, on the facade of the buildings you can see that. So tombs, mosques, buildings of public utility and of royal uses like palaces and courts were built. The riverbed side were chosen to make their palaces from 15th century onwards. The material used for the buildings initially was of the temples, which they destroyed, and later on they built buildings of buff color sandstone found from Chunar, Banaras, and grey color stone local obtained from the Narayani quarries of Delhi, and red sandstone which was obtained from Fatehpur Sikri near Agra. The first octagonal tomb was built in India during this period, and the tallest Qutub Minar was also constructed. Now these sultans also introduced a centralized army. It was centrally recruited, centrally paid and centrally governed. The cavalry branch became more important and the concept of reserve forces started. As the new rulers depended more on horses because of their speed and agility, horse trade was monopolized by the Sultan, and horse became the most dear and costly commodity in the market according to Professor Salman Digby, who have written on the horse trade and the Delhi Sultans. Standard land revenue system was imposed in cash and kind after the measurement of the land, and the landed intermediaries were put under control like Khuds Muqaddam's Chaudhurys, and they became part of the revenue collecting machinery. Jizya, the poll tax, was imposed on Hindus, as we have seen that they have been doing it in Christian world also and in West Asia also. It was imposed on Hindus, and Hindus were now given the status of zimmis. That means that they were allowed to practice their religion, follow their customs and tradition and beliefs. The new ruler brought with them the art of writing chronological history called Tariq, which developed in Arab, but in India, Tariq traditions were more Persianized, that is, the history writing borrowed more Persian style than Arabic. The contemporary records were written in Persian as the language of the court was Persian, thus India got new script, and the new language, and Sanskrit no more remained an official language. According to Professor Muhammad Habib, the arrival of cosmopolitan Arab bourgeois in Western India had already facilitated the growth of trade, and now with the Turkish rulers, new urban centers were founded. During the Sultanate rule, the movement of the artisan got impetus, and they were no longer bounded to the caste ties in the new egalitarian society, where the skills were given importance than the caste. With the revival of trade and commerce and the coming of new urban centers, the cash currency was also revived. Introduction of centralized currency, silver tanka and copper jital was also introduced. Earlier, every dynasty had their own coins, which caused trouble to the traders, and there was also paucity of the coins. So the money economy had stopped actually. Gujarat, Sindh, Bengal remained the main overseas centers for trade, and overland and inland trade was also revived with the coming of sultans in Delhi. By the 14th century, Indians were also incorporated in the nobility, especially during Muhammad bin Tughlaq period. And also a new class of scriveners among Hindus emerged who were well acquainted with the language of the rulers. So there emerged a class of the Kayasthas. The Sufi movement began in Persia and by 11th century had grown into a well-developed movement. Sufism was a liberal reform movement within Persia, and it had its origin and it spread into India in the 11th century. Most of the Sufis, these mystics, were persons of deep devotion who disliked the display of wealth and degeneration of morals following the establishment of the Islamic Empire. The arrival of Sufis to India with the coming of these rulers, new rulers, in the northwest region was because of the Mongol troubles in Central Asia, and by 13th century they became very popular amongst the people of Hindustan. The efforts of Sufi saints helped to lessen religious fanaticism in India. Hindus in large number became followers of the Sufi saint. Their tombs are still centers of pilgrimage in India for both the religion, Hindus and Muslims. For example, Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia's Dargah in Delhi and Moinuddin's Dargah, Hazrat Moinuddin Chishti's Dargah in Ajmer in Rajasthan. It was owing to them that the foundation of the present-day Hindi and Urdu language was laid down, which was then known as Hindavi Zaban. The linguistic division on the basis of religion took place in the 19th century under the colonial rule, where the people were not only divided geographically, but also on the basis of language. Now, it was during the period of Sultanate or the Sultan rules that North India also witnessed coming up of Bhakti movement. Now, Bhakti movement, it was a movement which was solely where the persons solely dedicated themselves to the worship of the God. And it has pantheism as one main force and also of monotheism. The spiritual leaders of Bhakti presented were quite in sync with the Sufi leaders. They opposed the caste distinction. They opposed social inequality and questioned the authority of mediators in religion. The Sultanate towards 15th century presented an atmosphere of growth of syncretic culture, where Muslims learned the sciences of Hindus and Hindus manned their finance department. North India became an example of adaptation and assimilation of religions and cultures. The arrival of new technologies in rural and urban sectors, with the coming of Turks, heralded agrarian and textile production, introduction of cotton carded bows, spinning wheel, iron shoe for army, for horses in army, Persian wheel, water lifting devices, etc. And cannons were some newly introduced devices. The new buildings were also constructed with the new techniques that came with the Turks.